Do the Gospels contain internal and external evidence that they are eyewitness accounts? One compelling line of evidence comes in the form of what are called undesigned coincidences. When one is telling a story, especially a story one has witnessed, one often hits the highlights and does not explain every detail. The focus is on what is important to the action. Now, this is why two eyewitnesses will testify in different ways about the same event. Each person brings his own unique point of view to his description due to his individual preferences and predisposition. When telling a story, one gets caught up in what one actually remembers and drops the incidental references to insignificant facts, the sort of facts which are seemingly selected randomly by the memory according to the individual. This is typical of real memoirs, but not of legendary embellishment. When accounts from different eyewitnesses fill in the unknown details for each other, this is called an undesigned coincidence. Such coincidences, especially when they are considered in their cumulative force, provide strong evidence for the integrity of the individual accounts. In Matthew 11:21, Jesus pronounces a curse on some cities in Galilee, saying,
"Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the miracles had occurred in Tyre and Sidon which occurred in you, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes."
So the question naturally arises, what is Jesus talking about? What were the mighty works done in Chorazin and Bethsaida? For Chorazin, we really cannot say. It's one of those cases where we realize that Jesus did many things that we do not have recorded in Scripture. And Bethsaida is never mentioned elsewhere in the Gospel of Matthew. And Mark and John, who do name Bethsaida a couple times, tell us nothing that would make sense of Jesus' words as quoted in Matthew. But in Luke's Gospel, we find the answer. Luke 9:10 reads,
When the apostles returned, they gave an account to him of all that they had done. Taking them with him, he withdrew by himself to a city called Bethsaida.
Immediately after this verse, and set in the same geographic location, we have Luke's account of the feeding of the 5,000. Now here, we have an answer to our question about the mighty work done in Bethsaida. It was there that Jesus fed the 5,000. Now a critic, trying to get around the force of this coincidence, might point out that Luke gives both the location of the miracle and, in Luke 10:13, Jesus' pronouncement of the woes upon Chorazin and Bethsaida. Might Matthew have simply copied from Luke, forgetting to include the reference to Bethsaida? Well, of course, this is possible, but most scholars, both traditional and liberal, think that Matthew did not use Luke's gospel at all in writing his own. Now, no one, not even an honest and observant eyewitness, can report every event in complete detail. So the alternative hypothesis of chance and legendary elaboration do not really explain the coincidence at all. And modern scholarship makes the copying hypothesis very unlikely. The best explanation is that Matthew was simply reporting facts as he knew they had occurred. Now, in John 6, verse 5, as Jesus is preparing to feed the 5,000, he turns to Philip and asks,
Therefore Jesus, lifting up his eyes and seeing that a large crowd was coming to him, said to Philip, Where are we to buy bread so that these may eat?
Now, Philip is a minor figure in the Gospels. After the calling of the disciples, Jesus addresses Philip directly only once that we hear of. Why then does Jesus ask this question of Philip? Why not Peter or James or John, who are much more prominent figures? Why not Judas, who kept the money? Presumably when John told the story, he wasn't concerned with the reason Jesus chose Philip. But now if someone were forging a story as fiction, crafting a legend, he would have a literary reason for selecting a particular disciple as a character in his fictional narrative. Accordingly, a fabricator of fiction would not select a character without making the reason clear to the audience. So why did Jesus choose Philip? John's Gospel does not really say why. Now keep in mind that we just learned in the previous undesigned coincidence that the miracle took place in Bethsaida. Luke 9, verse 10. Then turn to John chapter 12, verse 21. Here is Jesus teaching, and some Greeks approach and want to speak with him, asking permission from one of Jesus' disciples. Now, casually, in the course of reporting their request, John remarks,
Now there were some Greeks among those who were going up to worship at the feast. These then came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida of Galilee, and began to ask him, saying, Sir, we wish to see Jesus.
Now, here is really a remarkable interlocking of the two passages in John and Luke. There's no other way in the world that this can be explained as having one of the authors copy from the other. John does not tell us where the miracle took place, and Luke never mentions Philip. And the coincidence is too tight and clear for a chance or legendary elaboration to be a plausible explanation. But putting the three passages together, we find that they interlock like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. This is what real history looks like. It has a ring of truth. Two passages in Mark give us the setup for our third undesigned coincidence. In Mark 6:31, we find a reference to large crowds of people, so large and pressing that they forced Jesus and his disciples to withdraw.
And he said to them, Come away by yourselves to a secluded place, and rest a while. For there were many people coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat.
Now, this passage sets the stage for the feeding of the 5,000. A little time later, Mark gives us another vivid description of the scene.
And he commanded them all to sit down by groups on the green grass.
Two questions arise from these passages. First, why should there have been particularly large crowds just then? We aren't entitled to demand an answer, but it would be evidence of the historical faithfulness of the narrative if we could find one. Second, it is a bit odd that the grass should be particularly described as green. In Palestine, there's only a short growing season. After that, dry heat turns the grass brown, and it remains brown throughout the summer. But in John's description of this setting for the same miracle, we find a detail that explains both of these facts. John 6:4 reads,
Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was near.
At Passover each year, thousands of Jews traveled far away to Jerusalem to celebrate the feast. That would definitely explain why a Galilean town would be unusually crowded at the time. And as it happens, Passover falls every year right in the middle of the very brief growing season when the grass would be lush and green. John doesn't mention the crowds or the green grass, though he does note that there was much grass in that place, in John 6, verse 10. Now, Mark doesn't mention that the season was Passover. But putting the two accounts together makes for an explanation that fits everything together. And no other explanation does the job so well. This has the ring of true history. Even skeptics believe the Gospels were written at different times and places. Where the accounts are obviously independent, the odds against some kind of subtle collusion are astronomical. The best explanation is that they were writing about something that actually occurred. This undesigned coincidence supports the historicity of all the different accounts. When we overlap the Gospels in this way, these undesigned coincidences provide evidence that the Gospel accounts are eyewitness testimony of actual historical events.